Scarlet fever stuck with full force in my body. My father was quarantined from the house for 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I stayed in my parents' bed, and my mother nurtured me and took care of me. I went through the full cycle of the disease. I remember most vividly my skin peeling away. By the end of that time, I was terribly weak. One day, my mother came in and said I could stand up and go outside. She took me to the door, and when the door opened, the radiance of the light blinded me because something dramatic had happened. When I went in there 6 weeks before, it was dead of winter. When I went in there, I was ill. I wasn't thinking about outside. But when I came out, it was radiant spring. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. And I wobbled out into the yard, and my feet went into the grass, and the grass came up between my feet, and it looked like it was lacing itself so to hold me to the ground. And at that moment, I had an insight. It was just a dramatic insight that I've never forgotten. I looked down, and I was watching my feet in the grass, and I said, I am connected to everything. Now that didn't last long. It lasted a few seconds, and I went on into a very ordinary life. But thereby hangs a tale, and I want you to join me in understanding that tale by following. This summer, if I live so long, I will become a genuine card-carrying octogenarian. You can applaud if you'd like. Yes. And that gives me permission to talk about the way the journey has gone since the front yard at age 7. And I want to work that with you, but I want you to think about it in this way. Our lives form arcs. And if we pay close attention to our lives, we begin to see the arc. We begin to see the shape of our life and the direction and the course of our lives. And when we get to my age, which I have many more years behind me than I have ahead of me, you can see the arc more clearly. Another thing I want you to pay attention to, there are 2 dimensions of my life that are fundamental. One is external, you're seeing that right now, and the other is internal, and you don't know what the hell I'm thinking. The internal life, what's it like to go there? This is going to be a lecture about my inscape, about my mindscape. And I want you to follow it with me to see how the arc begins to work itself out. And there's a third thing. Your life is lived with motifs that come with the basic stuff of your childhood. You grow up and you live it out over the rest of your life. And I grew up in a very traditional, intense, emotionally charged religious piety. And I've never forgotten it. It's always still there. I still work with it all the time. I teach in the field of religious studies now. I worked in philosophy of religion for years. I've done that. Why is that? What was that arc that began those years ago? Let us go there. Now, I've divided this into 5 movements, so you'll know when it's over. The first movement you've just heard, it's called the scarlet fever movement. Second movement, I went to college. I was the only one in my family to do that. And they did that so that I would be fully programmed in my religious tradition because it was a religious college. They made a mistake. And the mistake was they not only allowed but encouraged me to take a course in philosophy. Blew me away. I want to tell you, I walked into that course. I didn't even know how to spell philosophy. I spelled it with an F. And I was struggling with the course. What are they doing in here? And within about 2 weeks, I was mesmerized. Do you mean I can think about these things, these enormous questions that had lain fallow in the dim reaches of my subconscious and had never been brought out. And there I was having to look at them. And I could think about religion and reflect on it and say, what's going on here? And it changed everything. Because with an arduous effort and a fairly long span of study, I wound up with a PhD in religion, studying philosophical theology, a bastard child of two worlds. The philosophers don't like you because you're a theologian, the theologians because you're a philosopher, and that makes you home free. And what happened in the midst of all of that is that I learned I'm not a very good philosopher. I'm not very good for a number of reasons probably, but one of them is I refused to specialize. I didn't want to specialize. I didn't want to belong to a school of thought. I didn't want to spend my life studying one dude or one problem or one question. I wanted to look at the big picture. I wanted to see how things connect. Now, it's not that I'm against specialization. Some of you are going to be very intense specialists. I want to tell you something about it. It's dangerous. Because if you specialize, you can get lost in the details. You can be lost in the particulars. And therefore, you must be canny and aware when you specialize how much you're going to specialize and how much you're not going to specialize. Very important stuff. I taught and have taught here for 40 years, working on that stuff, confusing people, challenging young minds to think weird thoughts. It's been wonderful. But there's another movement, movement 3. I became, as all people, if they live long enough, do, 40 years old. This is called the midlife crisis, and I went through it with extravagant intensity from riding red motorcycles on. But one of the most important things happened to me in 1975. Under special clinical conditions, I ingested LSD. Aside from it literally taking my mind to the edge of fragmentation, I became a woman. I didn't ask to become a woman. I didn't try to become a woman. I just woke up in womanness. And here's what I learned from that experience. If every man in the world were to have that experience, they would become raving feminists. And we need it. I didn't see one man's clap. Well, but I decided to give birth. The only thing is that I'm ill-equipped for that, and therefore I decided to give birth through my mouth. And after an agonizing labor, I produced a huge cube. And the cube had, of course, 6 sides, and on all sides it had the same word. And the word was yes. What a delicious word. Yes. It put me in mind of William James, the great philosopher who dealt with religion all the time. And he says, religion is about the yea-saying of life, about the capacity to say yes. Think about that, how powerful that can be. I think about it all the time. What's it like to live in the yes, in the face of all of it? The disasters, the craziness, mortality, think of it all, and then in the midst of that, say yes. Wow. E. Cummings put it beautifully. I thank you, God, for this most amazing world, for the leafy, greenly spirit of trees, for everything that is natural, that is infinite, that is yes. Can't beat that, can you? But even more importantly, that experience drove me to think about gender. I thought about it in a way I'd never thought about it before. And to think about it, you go beyond philosophy into the viscera of your own being, because we all participate in gender. It doesn't matter whether we're androgynous or homosexual or bisexual. It doesn't matter. We still deal with gender. Everybody does, don't we? And therefore, I had to get in touch with gender and what it's really about. It's about the most intimate and the most intense and profound experience of connection you'll ever find. It's universal. It's lifelong. It is there. And if you can come together, what would that possibly mean? Connection. Plato put it beautifully in his Paean to Love called Symposium, where he had Aristophanes talk about a myth. And the myth was that when human beings were originally invented, they were both one. And therefore there was only one, and therefore no gender. Isn't that fascinating? But there was a problem. Because they were together, they were more dangerous to the gods, and the gods got very upset. And so Zeus split them into male and female, and ever since then, they've been looking for each other. They've been looking for the connection, the most immediate, the most sacred, the most powerful connection there can be. Movement 4. 1987, I was invited to give a last lecture along with 4 other professors. Last lectures say this: if you had only one lecture to give in your life, what would you say? Think about it. It was traumatizing. Now, thank goodness I've gone beyond that and done more lectures, but this could well be the last. I'm over the hill. But in that lecture, I bet you can't guess what I talked about. My quest for connections. Juicy, isn't it? Now, this lecture is very different from that one because I'm over the hill. But what I did in that lecture was talk about 3 things. Thing number 1, everything is connected. I cannot prove that. I cannot ever prove it. I don't think anybody else can. Now, by the way, some of the greatest minds of history have tried to prove that and tried to demonstrate it. All the way back to the ancient thinker Protagorus, who talked about the harmony of the spheres, to Plato, who talked about absolute spirit, or absolute form, and to Hegel, who talked about absolute spirit. And you move on to Einstein, who talked about a unified field theory. You move to Teilhard de Chardin, who talked about the omega point. They're all looking for the connection. No one's ever fully found it, but the connection is what they seek. How do things fit together? Where do I fit in how things fit together? How do I do that? It's a big question. Now, by the way, I'm not against particular or specialized life at all. In fact, I think if you understand connection, you understand the particular. That's the reason Friedrich Hegel said we live in the universal particular. That is, if we learn to mediate through the particular, the universal, we see what the particular has to offer. But if you get lost in the particular and don't see the universal, you're lost. Lost. William Blake, poets always put it best. William Blake put it well. To see the world in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wildflower. To hold eternity in your hand and to live it in an hour. Wow. To see the whole world in a grain of sand. What was he saying? In the most particular, detailed things, the smile of a person, an acorn held in your hand, in all of it, look into it for the connection. Look into it for how it all connects. That's the trick. And now, movement 5. I can't tell you what movement 5 is because I'm in the middle of it. And I'm working on it every day. And you know, as the philosopher Kierkegaard said, we live forward but understand backwards. So I've got to get further along And then look back and I'll tell you. But in the meantime, I'm caught in the thrall of connection. I've spent an entire life since I was 7 years old in that front yard, finding and looking for the connection. How do things fit together? And that is the religious question. All of the stuff we say about religion, religions that get into ideological fixes and find themselves, this is the final answer. No, no religion has ever given the final answer, even the one I practice. The religious sensibility is deeper than that. All that religions can do is give you a pointing gesture. They can give you a suggestion, a hint, a possibility. But in the end, you've got to recognize that it's a mystery that leaves you dreaming for life. And it's a mystery that goes toward and longs for and reaches into the grandeur of connection. Do you know what? Think about what it would be if you really believed everything on this planet is connected. And we're all connected to each other. And in fact, that's where it begins. You look around at some of these people and you say, I don't want to be connected to them. You are. And you'll never get over it because the grand connection is there. And the mystery of that connection is what holds us together in the end. So every one of you who awaken to that question will be religious. I don't care how you express it. It is a part of the sensibility to know that in the end, we are required to live into that infinite whole because we're a part of it. We are a particulate. We will never give up on it. Go with me there. Pascal, in his little book Pensées, puts it beautifully. He says to us, we are all caught in a strange situation. We are disproportionate. And in that situation, we must look at how we live. At one extreme is the infinitely all, and the other extreme is the infinitely nothing. And you and I are suspended between the all and the nothing. And if we awaken to that reality and honor it, it will honor us by giving us a place in the universe, a place where we live through all of our particulars, intensely and devotedly, but all the while we are suspended between the two infinites, and we will always be there so long as we live. That is the fulfillment of life. That is where you find yourself honored in all of the particulars. I'm going to quit.